Hi guys, and welcome to tonight's Music Tech webinar. Tonight we're going to be looking at modulation effects. Now this is a really interesting kind of bunch of effects that you can use, all using kind of circuitry to create these wonderful and interesting effects. So what we're going to look at then, so let's just have a look at our flow for this evening and just see where we're at. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them at the end during the Q&A, or if you want to ask as you go along, you can tweet us, and we'll be looking at our Twitter account tonight, so at MusicTech101. So if you want to send us a tweet or a notification, we'll try and answer it there. Or if you want to use the Q&A in this presentation or the discussion in this presentation, we'll be monitoring them as well. So pitch in, see how much you want to add to the show, and we'll just give a brief overview of what we're going to discuss, and then let's see how this goes. Okay, what is modulation is the first part. So we're just going to analyze kind of what is modulation, why is it such an awesome effect, why have artists, producers, composers been using these particular effects for the longest amount of time, and why are they constantly renewing, revamping, redeveloping these particular set of effects. The next thing we're going to look at is common parameters of modulations, and once again, just like the delay, just like the chorus, there are a few set parameters, but there's a lot more that are kind of different with every single module, and that really is dependent on how the circuit is built. The next thing we're going to look at is different kinds of modulation effects. We're going to do a brief demonstration, and this week you'll be glad to know that it seems like all is well. The audio is working in both the presentation mode and the logic sequence, so we should be okay there. And then we'll move on to the Q&A and see if you guys want to get involved and ask some questions. Okay, so once again, if you do want to ask questions, you can tweet us at MusicTech101 or use the discussion panel in this particular webinar. So, an introduction to what is modulation. Now, the thing that makes modulation so interesting is the fact that it adds movement and depth to your sound. Now this is predominantly developed using a low frequency oscillator, or an LFO, and the reason why the LFO is so important to this is because it makes it sound below 20 Hertz, so you can't actually hear it. If you think of the human ear from 20 Hertz to 20 kilohertz, you can't actually hear the low frequency oscillator, so this makes it perfect. And I think of this a bit like animation and following a path, if it were. So for instance, if you have a particular signal, whether it be a guitar or a vocal or something like that, and you've got this original signal, and then you route it to this low frequency oscillator, you're then controlling it in a different way. And the way you route the oscillator is what makes it really important. So you imagine routing it to volume, for instance. So every time, and I'll bring my mouse into play here, so every time it hits this, it boosts the volume by 5 decibels, and every time it gets to this part of the sine wave, it lowers it by 5 decibels, and this continuously happens all the way. And the good thing about an oscillator is it continues going, that pattern keeps going, and this is just a simple sine wave. But you imagine some kind of triangular wave or some kind of sawtooth wave, and it can be any kind of wave. And that's, you know, one of the perks about this, and that's why there are so many different kinds of modulation effects. So predominantly, when you're thinking of modulation effects, you are looking at how the LFO has been interpreted, or how the audio signal has been routed to that particular LFO. So, I think I might have covered most of this in the last one actually. Just following that path, yeah, I did. Sorry about that. And it's over time. So, in a minute, we'll talk about the parameters that you can, but you really got to think about this as time and volume, if it were, but you know, it depends how it's routed. So we'll have a look at that now. Okay. Okay, so some common parameters of modulation. Now, the first one, sometimes it's called different things. So this first one, sometimes you'll see it being called depth, sometimes you'll see it being called intensity, and sometimes you'll see it being called amount. Basically, if we just flick back to that last slide, basically the depth, the amount, is how high this low frequency oscillator gets. So the more intensity it gives it, the higher this peak here and the lower this peak here, giving the fluctuation a massive amount of depth. Okay. So the next one is the speed or the rate. Now the rate chooses how fast that oscillator moves along. So you will see more cycles per second for a faster rate. So basically, go back to this one again. At the moment, you've got this kind of cycle. Say it's one cycle per second. Now, cycle starts here, and it won't finish the cycle until here. And if you put these together, you'd see a kind of a dodgy looking circle, and that's one cycle. Now, if you imagine that's one cycle per second, if you sped the rate up, you can have that one cycle per half a second or one cycle per tenth of a second, making that fluctuation between that volume go really quickly, giving you this ducking effect, which a lot of guitarists like, or it could just be controlled another way. It could be controlled by pitch. I'm just trying to think of other ways in which you control that oscillator, and of which there are many. Now, the final one, and these three are kind of really common amongst all modulation effects. Now, the final one is this mix. And this is basically just taking the original signal and mixing it with this duplicated signal, or the signal that's being controlled by the LFO. Okay. And we have a couple more, just like last week when we was doing the distortion one. We have this feedback, and it's this idea of sending the channel back into itself, and this is kind of giving it this pronounced quality or this tonal color, and it's quite nice. And you'll see this quite a lot, and this could be added as an extra effect. And then this phasing is really interesting. Sorry about this. I've got the slides upside down actually. This is feedback and this is phasing. The phasing is quite an interesting one, because rather than having the two signals, say this is the original signal and this is the duplicate signal, rather than having them played back at the same time, you can offset them. And that gives you yet another quality to this particular modulation effect. Okay. In the sake of chorus, you'll probably see that doubled and tripled and quadrupled to create these kind of tonal layers. So that's quite interesting. I think that's pretty much all I have to say about the. Oops, sorry, I'm going whizzing through them. All I have to say about the controls. But I think what's interesting with particular modulation is to see who's actually used it. Now, all being well, I should be able to play you some tracks tonight. So let's just look at chorus. So these are the ones I'm covering tonight: chorus, tremolo, vibrato, and flange. There are loads and loads and loads of others, and I've just put over here phasing and phase shifting, which is also interesting, of which you can experiment with them loads and loads and just kind of get an idea for how you could use them in your own mixes. But these are the most common. So this chorus one is basically the idea of taking one sound or one instrument or a voice and making it sound like multiple instruments. Now, the example that I'm taking is this Guns N' Roses track, Paradise City. So the intro guitar, I'm just going to play you just a couple of seconds, and I'm sure you'll be able to identify it straight away. So let me just kind of rig this up over on the other side here. Let's see what we got. Here we go. Let's see if this works. So there you go, and you can kind of hear that was one guitar, and obviously it sounded like many. And Slash from Guns N' Roses was always using these extra kind of effects on his tracks, which made his guitar just sound so awesome. Okay, so that's the chorus, and we'll go into a bit more depth on chorus in just a minute. We'll try and apply it to some of our tracks in our demonstration. Now, the next one we have is this tremolo. Now, the idea with the tremolo is this idea of routing the LFO to the volume signal, so the volume just ducks and comes in and out. And the track that I've chosen for this is this Crimson and Clover. It's quite an old track, might not be completely to your taste, but here it is, and it's in the intro. It's on the rhythm guitar this time. So let's have a little listen to this. I'll just play you a couple of seconds. It's in the right ear. Okay, so I mean you can slightly hear it there, and you can hear the guitars just kind of ducking in and out, and that's quite a nice effect. Now, a lot of my students get tremolo and vibrato completely mixed up, and it's easy to do actually, because whereas tremolo is dealing with the kind of volumes, vibrato is dealing with the pitch, and it's the fluctuation of pitch. Now, the best way I can kind of say about this is using your guitar. Like on the next track I'm going to play, which is the Rolling Stones, he's actually got it on a slide bottle guitar, which is really interesting. It's the idea of just kind of waving the notes ever so slightly to kind of fluctuate the pitch on and off of key. Now where is this? This is also the intro as well, that's lucky. Let's just play this. So obviously that's not done using an effect, that's actually done using a slide bottle guitar, but it's the same principle really, just this idea of kind of moving the pitch ever so slightly, and we're talking cents rather than semitones, okay, so it is ever so slightly, but that fluctuation just gives it that little bit of depth. Now flange is a really interesting one. Queen used this extensively. In the early days of using flange, what they used to do is just put their finger on the side of the reel-to-reel tape. Now the edge of the reel-to-reel tape is called the flange, okay? And my students get a real kick out of me keep using that word flange. I don't know why. Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, you put your finger ever so lightly on the side of the tape, which is called the flange, and it creates these fluctuations. Now, this is a bit harder to get to, so hopefully I'll be able to find this part in the song, which is 36 seconds. And it's literally on these words that just say dynamite with a laser beam. It is also on more of it, but it's most obvious there. And I'll just take it back to about 33 seconds so we can hear a couple. So here we go, have a listen to this, see what you think. Yeah, just play it one more time because that is such an awesome effect. Hold on, one more time. Yeah, I'm sure you all heard that. So really interesting. Those are the main ones. And obviously one thing I didn't say is the flange is just, because the tape has been pressed ever so lightly, it gives this kind of delay effect, okay? So what else we got? Those are my demonstrations. So we're going to hook over to the main demonstration now, and I'm just going to show you the 4 different modulation effects and experiment with some of the ways we can use them. Now I've set up a long note just like last week, and I've set up this little peaky pattern on the guitar, but I've also set up a built-in modulation, e.g. chorus and chorus, tremolo, vibrato and flange, but I've also put it on the guitar rack as well, so you can kind of see the difference between using it as a guitar rack effect or using it as just a normal production effect, okay? So let's see, you might have to just bear with me 2 seconds while I switch this over. So just 2 seconds, right, here we go. There we go. Right, we're there. Good. Okay, so this first one then, we're just going to look at the chorus effects. And I've just applied it to a long note because I think that's the most obvious way that you can actually hear these effects. So I'm going to start off with the note being off. So let's just play that. So there it is with nothing. We're just going to turn the amp on just to make it a bit more prominent. Okay, so the amp's had a little bit. Okay, so let's try the guitar effects panel. So what have we got here? Just a retro chorus, nothing too major, 2 dials, so you can increase the rate, which is the speed, or you can increase the depth, which is that height parameter, okay? So let's turn it on and let's just have a little play. We've also got this little sync button as well, which syncs the timing, which is really useful. And there you go, you're getting one note and it's sounding like many. Let's just play that on its own again just so you can hear it. Okay, and then with it. And that's quite nice. I mean, that's a very simple version of a chorus, but it's quite nice. And when you play that, let's just turn it off again. When you play that with a more complex pattern, that's where it becomes really interesting. That's where you can build up these effects where you may have had this really nice simple pattern to start off with and you think, oh, that's a bit naff. But the minute you put some kind of modulation effect on, all of a sudden it goes, whoa. And it's the same way I feel about keyboard. Sometimes I'm just playing a normal piano and then I'll go to my my Phantom or whatever module I'm playing with, and I'll chuck on some effects, and all of a sudden I'm playing these really great riffs. But actually I'm still playing the same riffs, I've just added the effects, and that sometimes is the big difference between a great part and just an average part. So here we go, so we'll play it without first. Okay, now we'll play it with, so we just turn this on. So that might be a bit much, but you know what, it's okay. Now let me just come back over to my original thing here. Now the reason I've done this is because I've shown you how it could be patched in as an insert. Now pedal board is generally done as an insert, but this next one, this production effect that I'm going to do, is actually done as a send. Okay, so now I can actually control the amount of effect I put on it. So let's just play that part again. And currently this is turned off. Okay, so here's my effect. Once again, it's really simple. Apart from this time I've got this extra parameter of mix, and you'll notice that that depth has now turned to intensity. Exactly the same dial, just a different name. Okay, so let's turn this on, and using this green dial here we can just turn the amount up or down, and we'll kind of have a little play with that now. Okay, and it just muddies up the sound. I think that's really interesting. I mean, the boundaries are limitless, and it's really up to you whether you want that extra parameter of patching in as a send and actually controlling the amount that you send to that channel, or if you want to do it like the pedal board here and have it take over. The minute you turn it on, it takes over the whole track. That's really up to you. So there's our little chorus. There's a couple of ways of playing with it, and you should definitely have a little play with this. Now, just in case you are new to Logic or new to production, how I set this up is really easy. You get these little slots here. When you click on it, you have these buses. Now, if you come down to an empty slot, you can go bus 8, click on that, and the minute you do that, it starts an aux channel. Now, all I've done here is just relabeled all of my aux channels, and that's why when I click on these buses, you'll see the names are right next to them. And then you can actually patch in whatever effect you want. You'll also notice that if you wanted to, you could patch in multi-effects as well. That's ridiculously interesting. So you know, you have trouble with that. We are going to cover multi-effects in 2 weeks' time, so bear with us on that one. But anyway, let's do tremolo now, and we'll go back to our original sound, and it's the same sound again. Okay, so let's turn the amp on. We've got this beast of a tremolo now, total tremolo. Should be interesting. Right, let's turn that off for a minute. Now here we go. Now the good thing about this one is actually you've got this panning effect as well. It's really interesting. So you've got, as well as kind of having these tremolo sounds with volume dips in and out, you've also got this panning effect as well, which makes it really awesome. You've also got the sync button as well, which keeps it in time with the actual track. Really useful for when you're doing production music, so things don't go out of time. Sometimes you don't want that, but it's up to you really. Now this is interesting. Wherever it says wave, basically that's saying, and sometimes it gives you little points, but basically it's saying you can change the kind of wave. So I described in the presentation that you can actually have a sine wave, or a sawtooth wave, or a square wave, and that's when you see this dial, that's when you can actually change the way the wave works, which is brilliant really. So there's loads of stuff going on there. And once again, playing with it, I mean, you can hear what it does, but having a little play with that, see how you can fit that into your productions, it's going to be really useful. We'll just do the same with this one as we did the last one. So just turn this off, and we're going to turn the other tremolo on. So this is the production effect tremolo. Okay, and this is one where we can actually control the phasing of it as well. So is it turned on? Here we go. Lots of depth. Rate is 1 to 16. That's every semiquaver. Let's have a little play with the phasing and changing the way the waves work. Now how cool is that? I really like that. Let's just see how that works with our kind of more complex notation. That's without. Okay. And you can hear that it just adds a different rhythmic element to it as well, which is it's awesome. I mean, I love it. I love it. It's brilliant. Okay, so that's tremolo. Now let's move on to a bit of vibrato. Let's see what the difference is with vibrato. Let's get rid of that. Once again, we turn the amp on, we turn the pedal board on. Nice, easy vibrato. You have different kinds of waves that you can use for this one as well. And then you have these simple rate and depth dials again. So I mean that's fantastic. And you can kind of get what's happening now. I'm sure just by listening to these few things you can actually get what's happening now, and you can hear the movement in the original track, which is kind of the main point. Okay, right, we'll just do the flange quickly. I'll let you guys play with them. I think I've done enough on that, but we'll just do the flange quickly just so you can hear the difference on this track as well before we move over to just doing a bit of Q&A. So there's the original sounds, turn the amp on, and I mean how cool is that effect? We have the flange factory on this one. Whoa! And it almost sounds like the notes bending in and out. If you've ever done that with a steel plate before and you've wobbled the steel plate around and you hear that wobble, 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 that kind of sound. And it's almost like that, isn't it, really? Okay, let's just hear that in the mix with this more complex part. And also remember, the reason you're getting such a radical effect with this particular module is because it is taking over 100% of the sound, okay? So you don't need to have it that hardcore. If you just want it as a more subtle effect, you know, we can literally just add it as the send effect that we've got here. So let's just turn that off, and for the last little demonstration, let's just show you the flange built in here. Another thing is, actually, some of you might be wondering how I got to these. Now, they are under modulation. It's nice and easy, and there's loads and loads of modulation effects you can deal with. The rotary cabinet is really nice. That emulates kind of like a Wurlitzer speaker, which is nice, which just spins round and round. But that's where they are. So let's just have a final play with this, and we'll leave it at that. Now let's turn it down. And I mean that's nice. I mean, just to show you what it sounded like originally. Okay, bear with me for 2 seconds. I'm just going to flip back to the presentation just to finish off the show and do some Q&A, so it might just get a bit messy for a couple of seconds. There we go. Okay, so there we go. We had a little demonstration tonight just to show you a few of the things that you can do with modulation effects. And they are fantastic, and really, I mean, it's okay me sitting here talking to you about them, but the best way of learning this stuff and doing it is by experimenting and just see what you can do with it. One of the things that we've just done there is with guitar effects, but equally they sound just as brilliant on vocals. So definitely record your vocal in and have a go with some of those effects. I mean, yeah, there is no substitute for just playing with this stuff, okay? So the Q&A. One thing you should also note is a lot of the stuff for tonight's webinar was taken from this presentation here, which is my modulation effects one, which goes into probably quite a bit more depth and does a few more experiments. So if you are a musictechstudent.co.uk subscriber, please head over there and just have a look at them. There's a few more audio examples of that as well. Okay, let's see what we have for Q&A tonight. So once again, if you want to ask us a question while we're still online, Twitter, MusicTech101, or you can use the Q&A, or you can use the discussion panel here on the webinar, and just feel free to get in touch. Okay, so it looks like we've got a few. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that, it just takes me a couple of seconds just to get into this. So we've got one from Edwin, says I'm pumped, obviously liking using modulation, so make sure you get stuck in with that one. Fantastic. We've got one here from Harvey. Here we go. Fantastic. So we've got here from Harvey again. I hear a lot about LFOs giving a sound a fluctuating feel. Is there such a thing as a HFO, so high frequency oscillator? And does it do the same thing? The reason you don't really think about high frequency oscillators, as I said in the beginning, the reason the LFO works so well is because you can't hear it. So whether the oscillator is pitched or tuned to higher than 20 kilohertz or lower than 20 hertz doesn't really matter actually, as long as you can't hear it, because the idea is it's taking the path rather than anything else. It's taking the path of that signal so that you can route your original signal to it, and that's why you're getting these movements. Because if you think about an oscillator, what an oscillator is, it's an electronic signal that just creates a path. So it's, in terms of a sine wave, it just goes up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down for as long as you want it to, okay? And you can obviously make that signal higher, or you can make it quicker. And that's what makes it really interesting. So the minute you patch in a piece of audio, a piece of signal onto that, because you can't hear that, all of a sudden you can control the signal via how it's routed. And that's why it gives you that fluctuation feel. Really ridiculously interesting actually. And I'm sure that there's probably way more better presentations and better ways of explaining it than that, but certainly just a quick search for an LFO and some of the presentations online, you'll see it. And when we get to our synthesis season of webinars, I'll go into more depth about oscillators as well. Okay, so what else we got? This is funny. That's some real talk right there. Also from Edwin, actually. Cheers, Edwin. That's nice you guys have been following us tonight. I'm glad you enjoyed the show. What else we got? So it says here, this is from, I hope I pronounced it right, Geek Androids Official. And it says, what kind of modulation trends to be used on vocals, or can you use any type? Shout out for DJ Wolfgang, thanks. Well, there's my shout out. You can absolutely, you know, we heard on the Queen track there that they used that flange effect, some really massive effect, but before they did it, no one was doing that. And it wasn't until they did it that actually everyone was like, oh wow, that's really cool. And then all of a sudden, flange was just used for everything. During the 80s, it was just literally on every kind of commercial rock track you can name of. But certainly chorus is a massive one. You know, everyone uses chorus just to kind of get their vocals to feel a lot thicker. There's nothing worse than having kind of this trebly vocal, a bit like mine really, and it's got no depth to it. And we can use EQ to bolster out the depth, but once you get a bit of chorus on there and done properly, you can just really add that massive depth and that layer in it that just is impossible to get just from one single voice. Would you ever need to know about the history and development of modulation, especially LFOs? And I presume you're talking about the exam now for A2. Now, the A2 exam, you do need to know a lot about the histories, but it will mainly be targeted towards using equipment. So if you knew that a piece of synthesis had a particular LFO and you knew how it worked, absolutely you could get yourself some marks there, because it's not just about history, it's also about the development and the way things work. So understanding how an LFO works is gonna score you loads of marks really. And remember, for that particular question, and then we're looking at the production for A2 exam here, that is worth 16 marks. So you really do need to think, if you're looking at a unit, and the last 4 years they've given the students pictures of hardware units, and if you can kind of identify what each of the dials does, that's literally going to get you those 16 marks if you can talk about it adequately. And just have one from Geek Androids, and it says, hi, it's Dave from Geek Androids. Okay, fantastic. Well, oh, here we go. Hold on. Is there any other modulation ways from LFOs following on from Harvey? Thanks. Is there any other ways? Absolutely hundreds, actually. The next one that I would look at if I was you guys is phase shifting. Phase shifting is amazing, and if you're using Logic Pro, there's a really good phase shifter in there. Patch that into your keyboard, and just give it a try and see how it goes. But yeah, anything that, but most of what synthesis is based on this idea of modulation. So yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's just check the other sources of Q&A. Thanks tonight, guys. There's been loads and loads of questions. Absolutely brilliant. So let's just check the Q&A, see what we got here. Okay, we look like we got none there. Okay, let's just check this other one. Okay, so I think I'm going to sign off now, but you guys have been absolutely brilliant tonight. Next week we're going to look at ADT and double tracking. So this is really looking at kind of ways of using double tracking to kind of improve your mixes. And we're going to look at kind of doing acoustic guitars, doubling them up, and ways in which you can arrange this to make your mixes sound more bulky. Okay, so I'll see you, hold on. Oh, before we go, don't forget to sign up to the newsletter, so mymail.musictechstudent.co.uk, and get the weekly newsletters. And I'll see you next week, Monday, 8 o'clock. See you then.